call is now back in order. Before we left off for the lunch break, we were in section 1112. And before we do proceed, I'd like to recognize one of the commissioners who requested that she be recognized prior to us moving forward. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and we'd like this to be entered for the record. Honorable Chairperson Dennis Rodriguez and Honorable Senators, thank you for the opportunity to come before you to address Public Law 3161, which mandated the Guam Election Commission to review and update the policies contained within Title VI, the Guam Administrative Rules and Regulations, or GAR, Title III of the Guam Code annotated, and to recommend changes in advance of the 2012 elections. As the outgoing Democrat member and chairperson of the Guam Election Commission, I'm pleased to inform you that the Guam Election Commission members worked diligently and expeditiously and put many, many man-hours into the review and discussion of the election code. In addition, any decisions and or discussions that took place regarding the changes took place with the representation from both parties and the independent member of the commission. With that said, I humbly ask that this body be aware that it has always been the Election Commission's position that our role is ministerial in nature, and with that in mind, we approach the task before us cautiously so as not to tread too closely to the power and honor given this august body, that of creating law for the good of the general public. The Guam Election Commission made changes to the election code, a few of those changes include the renumbering of sections, the inclusion of the UOCAVA provisions, the increase in pay for precinct officials, the renaming of clerk positions, the combining of penalties into one section, and a review for consistency in the use of terminology. It has been our experience and position that the Commission will carry out whatever is mandated of it. However, we tread cautiously when asked to write and or rewrite laws. If after this body has reviewed the changes the Guam Election Commission has made to the Election Code of Guam, and this august body finds that other changes need to be made, then it is by your wisdom, power, and authority to do so, for it is not with the Guam Election Commission. With that said, it is our position to remain neutral on any other changes which may substantively change the content and or direction of the election code. If this honorable body has questions regarding the impact changes may make on the operational functions of the Commission, we'll be happy to address those questions. In short, if you have new requirements for the Guam Election Commission, please appropriate the necessary funding to ensure the Commission has the tools necessary to ensure the free and open election we have enjoyed for many years. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We were on section 1112. However, Senator Blas is not here now, so we'll come back to that, and I'll note it just so that we can move on with the process. We are on now 1113 on page 7, and we're going off the digest dated 2/20/2012 at 3:55 p.m. So just to make sure we're all on the same page here, and this is the version that's included with the committee report. No, the one that the very latest is what was submitted with the committee report, and that's 2/20/2012. If you don't have, can we request, please, staff, if they can get senators that don't have a copy of that version? It's online as well, yes. Okay, that may be the first one, and so changes were made, and the one we should be working off is the 220, which is on the website on the committee report as well. Yes, that's correct, yes. Okay. And what I'll do here is just go down and I'll read the sections off. I won't read the page number because that's where it'll throw you off. So I'll just go down in the section numbers and we can follow through going that way as well. Okay, so we are on section 1113, rights. Are there any questions for the Election Commission on this section?
I I just need to point out that 1113 is in relation to the original 1112. But you've changed that, so that adjustment, that
The
technical adjustment.
changes will be
yeah.
made. Thank you.
Thank you. If there's none, we'll move on now to 1114, formation of new, well, we already did that. That one now is, has been moved, so we'll go on to 1115, definition of a candidate. Moving on now to 1116. I'm sorry, Speaker Pangilinan.
Would it be I would like to maybe just make an amendment here that, because the way I read this now, a candidate is not necessarily, has not necessarily been certified. So if you're seeking a nomination, if you're circulating petitions, you're a candidate, correct? You don't have to turn in your packet to be a candidate. You do? But it says who either seeks a nomination or proposed for a nomination. So I just want to say, does in order to be defined as a candidate, does your packet have to be turned in? Or if you're seeking a nomination, you're still collecting signatures? Is there another section in the back that would address that definition? Right. So because if that, so it would be in this section then that I would want to make an additional definition, and that would be: a candidate is one who either seeks a nomination or is proposed for nomination by sponsors, or accepts funds towards an election in accordance with the provisions of this act. So I think if you're out there taking people's money because you're telling them you're going to run, I really think you need to fall under this election law in terms of accepting the money already at the very beginning. Because that's what defines you as a candidate. You're still subject to the provisions in here. And I really believe that, you need to begin to be held accountable to the election process and the requirements once you start accepting money from the general public.
Well, technically, you're correct, Senator. If in fact, when you file your papers, all the monies that you have raised up to then have to be reported in your initial report to the commission. But the seeking nomination, that could be by the party or the person himself, or nomination by sponsors. That is if somebody else goes in and picks up a petition for you, or those who are drafting other people. But the crux of whether you're a candidate, the person has to accept the candidacy. And the only time that we really, as far as the commission is concerned, the time that you accept this nomination or proposed for a nomination by sponsors or seeking outright yourself would be on the date of filing, and you automatically have to report everything that you have collected. And it's really an enforcement on the part of the commission to monitor them at all times.
Right. So I'm saying, but if you're saying that a candidate is subject to the provisions of this title, if he's seeking a nomination or is being proposed for a nomination, then I want to be very clear that
You can, yes,
that
certainly.
includes the receipt of money.
Yes,
That also then puts you under the definition of a candidate is once you receive money towards an election.
Yes, you certainly can just insert those
Right, yes.
2 or 3 words that
And that
says
would be,
or
that's,
accepts.
that's the amendment I'm proposing and offering to the floor for consideration by the body.
Thank you, Speaker Ben. Vice Speaker, you recognize?
I support the amendment being proposed by the last speaker, because I think it's imperative. I mean, under the current statute, you could collect several tens of thousands, and if you don't file your candidacy forms, what are you under the purview or the jurisdiction of the Election Commission to return that money or do something with that money? It seems to me that the last speaker is correct, that once you start collecting money, holding yourself out to the public as collecting money to be a candidate, then you should have to comply with all of the provisions of this title.
I agree wholeheartedly, and I'm sure the commission members share that. But we are assuming that anybody who is collecting money, with the idea that he's going to run, that it will be reported, unless you get somebody, of course, who's just using it as a ruse, to
But even
get
if it
money.
isn't a ruse and they don't collect the 250 and they're not qualified to be a candidate because they didn't have that number, they may have tried, they may have
Yes.
collected $25,000 or $250,000, but if they don't have the requisite number, then you're not claiming, they don't really fall under you. I think we've got to
Yeah.
protect the public as soon as someone holds himself out collecting money. Because right now, I think you have 63 people that have, or more than 60 people have taken out reports. If they don't, petitions, if they don't turn those back in and they collect tens of thousands of dollars, you can't call them in and say, what happened to those tens of thousands of dollars that you collect? So I really do think this is a very important amendment.
Sure.
Thank you, Vice Speaker. Yes, Speaker Ben, if you can please repeat the amendment.
It would be to amend 1115 definitions candidate to read, a candidate is one who seeks a nomination, is proposed for a nomination, or accepts money towards an election, proposed for nomination by sponsors, or accepts money from the general public towards an election in accordance with the provisions of this title.
Okay, does everyone have that amendment? Chris, can you? Go ahead.
I just worried about the federal election statute. If, let's say, you raised money and then you decided not to run, you could turn into a PAC and donate that funds for whatever you wanted to do. And people saying they're going to raise money, it would be hard for the election commission to monitor because there's only 5 employees or 6 employees and we don't have a lot of budget, so there's no way we could police. I mean, my problem is enforcement of your amendment is my problem.
I'll help you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Okay, on the amendment, there's no objection. Motion carries. We are now on 1116, nominee. Any questions or concerns on this section? If not, we'll move on to 1117, precinct. Moving on to 1118, vote tabulating device. One 1119, marking of ballot. 1120, voter verified paper ballot. Moving on to 1121, recall of elected officials.
Where are you? 11.
1121. We're moving on to now Chapter 2, the Election Commission. We are on Section 2101, the composition and removal of members, chairperson quorum. If there's no questions, then we'll move on to 2102, Executive Director, Appointment, Ex-Official Secretary, Compensation. Moving on to 2103, Election Commission, Duties and Responsibilities of Audit Report Rulemaking Authority. Senator Atta, you recognize?
Thank you. I have a question on, I hope we're on the same page here. Hold on a second, let me. Has to do with Election Commission duties. Wait a minute, I'm trying to reconcile the version that I marked on. 2103. On page 227, I guess it is, on line 2, it reads out on line 1, it says comply with its instructions, orders.
I'm sorry,
decisions."
Senator. If we can just reference the section, because we're not going to go based
Okay.
on the page.
Section 2103,
Okay.
section 2103A, and that would be down, I guess, 1, 2, 3. Well, here, let me read. The Commission shall have direct and immediate supervision over the municipal and district officials designated in accordance with the laws of Guam to perform duties relative to the conduct of elections. The Commission may suspend from the performance of said duties any of said officials who shall fail to comply with its instructions, orders, decisions, or rulings, and appoint substitutes. And the Commission shall remove any such official who shall be found guilty of nonfeasance or misfeasance, and shall remove any such officials who shall be found guilty or who is found guilty. In other words, we're saying any official who is found guilty, but I think that reads differently from when you say an official who shall be found guilty.
Senator, just to clarify, you're on 2103A. That's correct. Okay. Okay, we'll ask the commission now to answer.
Are you looking for it to say who are found guilty of nonfeasance
it
or
reads,
misfeasance?
The Commission shall remove any such officials who shall be found guilty, or who is, or do we mean to say, or who is found guilty? It's as if saying that you shall find the person guilty.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
So I think it probably could be corrected by simply saying then,
Who are found guilty?
shall remove any such officials who are found guilty.
Senator, is that the amendment? You want to delete the word shall?
Shall be,
Shall be.
and replace it with the word are,
That's old
who
language.
are found guilty.
You know, this is not part of what we changed.
That's existing statute.
That's existing in the statute now.
So are we limited to just
No.
what is changed then? We can't change existing?
No, we can change, yes.
Yeah, I understand.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, on Senator Tom Atta's amendment? No objections?
No,
I'm sorry, Senator
No,
Pangilinan?
because the way I read this is that in order to be removed, they shall be found
Yes,
guilty of malfeasance by the commission, not by a court.
that's correct.
But you can't remove them until you've determined that they have done something, and in the opinion of the commission, they've violated it. I think that's the reading of the structure of the sentence. That's my
Yes,
humble opinion.
you shall have found him guilty first in order to be released, is what
Well, you
this
could
is
put-
saying.
I mean,
I suppose you could, yeah.
yeah.
Well, I guess I don't want to get wrapped around the axle. It just seems that it's directing the commission that you shall find him guilty,
Right.
as opposed to saying, if you find him guilty, then you remove him.
You could say who are first found guilty.
So Senator, you want to amend your amendment?
Huh?
Would you like to amend your amendment, or you want to stick with that?
You could say
No, that's the way
That's the
I
way, okay.
understood it. I
Our
mean,
first
with
found
English
guilty.
being my second language,
who are first
that's the
found
way it seems it should read.
Senator,
Okay.
would you?
I
I'll
suppose
leave
you
it-
could
I'll leave
insert,
it to
found
the-
guilty,
I'll leave it to legal counsel.
right? I mean, I think that would not be,
I
I
suppose
don't want
that
to
you
spend
could
all
insert
afternoon on whether it shall be or are.
shall have, just to insert the word have, shall have been.
Okay, shall have been
or,
found
yeah,
guilty.
Would
or are
be
first found guilty, or have
No.
been found guilty.
Shall
Yeah,
have,
shall have been found guilty.
yes.
Okay, I think we're cool with that.
So Senator, that is an amendment to your amendment?
Yes,
And the amendment is, any such officials who shall have been found guilty.
Yes.
Okay, on the amendment? No objection, amendment carries. Any other amendments? Senator Blas, you recognize?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, the same kind of, I guess, question can be made on, I guess it's in subsection B, the second paragraph. The commission may retain one or more attorneys who shall be admitted. Or do we need to mean to say who have been admitted? Or shall have been admitted. To be consistent with the language, proffered earlier, I would proffer then an amendment to it for it to read shall have been admitted.
Okay, on Senator Blas' amendment? Yes. Senator Adams, we're done. Senator Blas' amendment? No objections, motion carries. Any other amendments or questions on 2103? If not, we'll move on to 2104, election manual. (2105). Moving on to 2106. Yes. Right here, right? But it was deleted, yeah. Yes, we're going to go back to 2104, which shows that it was removed. Is there a reason why?
So that's one typo. It wasn't removed. We don't want to be supposed to.
Okay, so it is, we are going to add, if I can get an amendment to add 2104 before election manual. If we can put, if I can get an amendment, please. Senator Yamashita, you're recognized.
I move that 2104 be readmitted or put back in front of election manual.
Okay. Any objections? No objections, motion carries. Now on 2105. On 2106, powers of the commission. Senator Blas, you recognize?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, can I guess when I read or any relevant non-party witnesses, what are we referring to? Because I noticed that in the digest, that's the language that's inserted.
What are we talking about?
My concern here, Mr. Chair, is it really is, and I recognize and I understand the powers, but that's everybody. Yeah, but I want to know why.
Well, they could be people who accompanied other people to the polls and may have witnessed something. So it really is, you know, if you're investigating a particular complaint and based on the complaint form that the voter would have filed,
Is it necessary to say non-party? Can we just say relevant witnesses?
no, because any voter can come forward.
That's what I'm saying, but see,
But-
any non-party, relevant non-party,
I thi-
and I understand, okay, what we're trying to do is just
Perhaps council can
guess my conservatism is
can,
coming out here with
shed
regards
light
to-
on that, because that, I believe, was one of the changes that was recommended by council.
And you know, I'm reading this, even if you say, or any relevant witnesses, my concern is I recognize that you have the authority to summon and everything. I just want to make sure that you're just summoning people for the purposes of the relevance of what's being said. Now, if the person that you want to summon is, you know, of course not related to a party and whatnot, but it's relevant to the case, then I understand. My concern is that this is just, this is way out there.
We'll have the council
It could
shed
be a
some...
policeman, it could be any.
Political party. I think, Senator, we're talking about people who may have seen something. I mean, and I don't think when they're talking party, they're talking political parties. They're talking about if Senator Pangilinan was seeing Senator Muñoz Barnes signing someone else's thing, he would be a relevant non-party witness. He never do anything, but we could still subpoena him to, you know, try to find out whether or not Senator Muñoz Barnes had done that. I mean, that's what I think they're going for. It's not necessarily anyone who did anything wrong.
Hence my argument for just be witness. Relevant witness.
I think that would be fine too.
Yeah.
I don't
It
really see a
really
problem
doesn't
with
take
it.
anything away from there. My concern is, I understand what you're saying, Chris, and I appreciate it. But when you read this, and the discussion is now, we all understand this, but 20 years from now, if somebody reads this, non-party, all of a sudden, you're just going to see it's going to be Republican, Democrat, Independent, Camel, whatever. I just don't want that to be the case. I see what you're saying here, non-party, not being a party to the case. But I just don't want that to be misconstrued down the road, because we're talking election commission, and it's very easy to be able to ascertain that you're talking about political affiliation. And I know that's not the case here.
Right.
So I would suggest that we just strike out the word non-party.
Okay. On the amendment to strike out non-party, any objections? Motion carries. 2107, placement on ballot. 2108, Chamorro Registry Advisory Board. 2109, Guam Decolonization Registry Advisory Board. 2110, Detailed Budget Requests. We're now on Chapter 3. (3101). Sections 3102. Senator Ada, you recognize?
Maybe if council can just advise, we talk here on in 3101 about a resident of Guam, and I guess in different statutes, I presume resident could be defined differently. But should we be specific here to state that resident of Guam as defined in this chapter or in this section, or because we do go into quite a bit of definition further on about, what constitutes a resident and all that. So I guess my question is directed at council as to whether we need to put that qualifying phrase in here.
To be quite honest, it would probably be appropriate to go back to definitions and define what a resident is.
Actually, further on, I think it does talk quite a bit about there's quite a bit of discussion about a resident,
For absentee voting.
I'm sorry?
Residencies discussed quite a bit in the absentee voting section, but I think if I remember correctly, there's places where it says residence and there's places where it says domicile, and those are two very different things in the law.
I guess 9123 is where it goes into quite a bit of discussion.
Did we do away with that domicile language?
Yeah, rules for determining residency. So it is defined in here, but it'd probably be appropriate to just say as defined in this section, or however we make reference to,
That would be appropriate.
I guess, as defined in section 9123,
Yes.
which is the section that discusses rules for determining residency.
Okay. Yes.
So then my amendment would be who is a resident of Guam as defined in section 9123 and who complies with the provisions of this title.
Okay. On the amendment? No objections? Motion carries. Did you want to ask? I guess when we get back to 9123. Section 3102, I'm sorry, Senator Barnes, you recognize?
Just want to ask Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, on page 15, line...
Can we do the sections? Because the pages are not, we're not going by the pages.
I'm sorry, section 3101,
Okay.
persons entitled to vote compliance with registration provisions, on line 21, on the last word, nor judicially declared. I know that that word insane, I think based on previous legislation and law, that we changed that description and that definition. And I just wanted to make a motion to ask legal counsel to define if there was any, if I'm not mistaken,
Where's she at?
that word was changed to use the correct legal terminology for that word. I know, if I'm not mistaken, we no longer use that word.
Counsel?
Yeah.
You're asking, should it be changed?
I'm just saying, if I'm not mistaken, I think we've done this before in previous legislation to change.
To amend that section?
No, to change the
reference to
the
insane.
word,
That's up to the
to
legislature.
use the politically
Okay.
correct.
That's up to the legislature.
Okay, so then I guess my motion would be to ask legal counsel to use the politically correct word. Well, declared incompetent.
Okay. On the amendment? No objections? Motion carries. Any other on 3101? We're now on 3102. Moving on to 3103. 3104. Senator Ada, you recognize?
(3104). This is existing language, but on line 5, that'll be 3104 D, one of the documents requires a voter registration card, U.S. military card, and I think we mean their U.S. military identification card.
Senator, can you please restate your question?
On 3104D,
3104 is
I'm sorry,
times for
30
registration.
gosh. No, it's not 3101. It'll be 3102. B, double I, D. Talks about written evidence of U.S. citizenship for purposes of the section shall include, and then it talks, gives a U.S. passport, etc. Or if you go to double I, it says A, driver's license or ID card, B, ID card issued by federal, C, school ID card, D, voter registration card, U.S. military card. I don't know what that is unless we mean military identification card. I'm not sure what a U.S. military card is.
Spy Speaker, you're recognized. I think he has an answer to that.
Well,
No?
not necessarily an answer, just in the last couple of days, this has been a very hot issue in the States. This issue of identification that's being required throughout the country. And I know there was one example I think it was in Indiana or Illinois, where a World War II veteran was denied the opportunity to vote because the only ID he had was his military ID from 1940 something, I think. And so there's this whole issue in the States right now about all these identifications and making it more difficult for people to vote without proper identification. Without identification. And so I'm just wondering if there's a recommendation from the Commission on how we address this issue to allow for more people to vote and not preclude people from voting. Voting is a basic right. And the more we put these strictures on, the more difficult it becomes. And, you get to the point where, as in the news the other day, where this veteran was being denied the right to vote because he didn't have a current ID with a photograph on it.
This section deals with registration, registering to vote. With regard to voting, the Commission has exercised in the past. They've cited me an example of a 5th grade ID card for an older woman in one of the precincts. So I think that's something to be considered at this point, I think.
Senator, did that clarify anything?
I just wanted to make sure that we put it on the record that I asked this question because it is it's a really hot issue. I'm sure you keep track of it and I keep track of it with NCSL and I'm sure you do it with the election commissions throughout the country, that there's this whole big fight over whether or not the requirement for all of these numerous IDs is intended to prevent and preclude minorities or less well-off people that don't have, people that don't drive, don't have a driver's license. And people that don't travel don't have passports. And so to have those as the requirements, only precludes those without the money to have a car or the ability to be able to travel. And I just want to make sure that this is not what we're doing here in registering. I mean, not even, this is even registering.
Yes, Commissioner Mesa?
And I know we
wait,
just
hold on.
resolved one issue with one woman who, because of her age, she could no longer get the fingerprint, and INS was refusing to renew her green card. And we had to write a letter to INS and say, the doctor has been the one that said that it's because of her age and we can't get and we finally got the green card for her. But I mean, I can't believe that what the circles, and I just don't want to, I want to make sure that we don't preclude anybody from voting. That's all.
Thank you, Vice Speaker. Recognize Mr. Mesa. Yes.
I believe the senator is very correct. There are a number of states where this is becoming a very hot topic. In fact, I think it's even gone to some of the federal courts. This, prior to, this was changed to the current language in the 25th Guam Legislature. Prior to that, the rules were very lax. But because of certain people's concern about certain elections, they stuck all of this in. So this has been in existence since the 25th Guam Legislature. Now, it's strictly up to this body if you want to change it.
Can we recognize
I think the Vice Speaker's issue that he's bringing up is different from mine. Mine is very simple. I don't know what a U.S. military card is, but I do know what a U.S. military identification card is.
Okay, so we'll address that first. So that'll be an amendment to
And that's on
3102, double ID, voter registration card, semicolon, U.S. military, and to include the word
card.
identification.
That's good.
Correct.
On that amendment? No objections? So, yes.
I really have no objection to that, but as you look at all the other sub-items, B, C, and D, they all have ID, and ID means identification, so do we keep it in, do we conform with all the other line items, or do we change everything else to identification? Because it is U.S. military ID card. It's the same as a school ID card or an ID card issued by the federal government. Do we change it all? I just want to, I'm just, is that going to be a technical change, or do we change it for all the others if we put military identification card here? Because it's...
Parentheses ID.
Yeah, I know. So do we do that for that too and just put U.S.
Would you like to make an amendment to that, just to
I'm just
add
saying
ID?
instead of putting identification, I guess, to put ID as it is, so as it is to conform with all the other sub-items there. Guess that would be my amendment to the amendment.
So we'll go first on Senator Ada's amendment to include the word identification.
Well,
No.
as I look at my military identification card, it says identification card. It doesn't say ID card. So,
If I may,
if you want to change all the other lines where it says ID card to identification, that's fine. I was just making note of that U.S. military identification
Okay.
card.
Thank you. So
The-
we'll,
No, I just wanted to add that the word identification in the context of this subsection is all the same. And at first reference of the word identification, it is put in parentheses. So Senator Ada's amendment could just be ID card because we're talking about the same thing, so that you don't have to keep repeating the word identification. But if that's what the card says and you choose to write the entire word, because that is the title of that card.
That's right. In the preceding
And so,
page.
it's okay to insert the whole word in.
No, that's fine. In the preceding page, it does say identification card, parentheses, ID, and so that's fine. That takes care of that. So we can just say military ID card.
okay. So the amendment, Senator Ada's amendment is
ID card.
to include ID card. To include ID. No objections, motion carries. Sections I'm sorry, Vice Speaker, you had a, on this same section?
Not necessarily. I'm just asking the commission members, in their conduct of the recent elections, have they found that these registration laws or these ID laws are being used to preclude people from coming to vote? That's all I'm trying to make sure that we don't. It's not that I'm trying to make an amendment. I don't have the experience, and I know some people have been conducting elections for 30 years now up there. So I'm just wondering, has it been your experience that these identification laws have or can be utilized to preclude people from registering and or voting? And I just want to make sure that we don't do that. Now that I know that this is a controversy throughout the country, I'd like to make sure that as we pass our new law, we don't make that same mistake.
I want to, we'll recognize the
I was
acting
just
chair.
also going to say then that to address your concern, Senator Cruz, later on in one of the chapters where you're actually there to vote, perhaps that might be the place to address your concern on what the voter has to present to prove that he is in fact a registered voter, and that the identification forms, the different kinds of documents that you can bring to prove that you are a registered voter and that you are in fact that person on the roster is that. So it could be addressed, but that is in a different chapter, and we could do it then.
Okay, Senator Ada, you recognize?
Yeah, I think now that the Vice Speaker has raised that issue, as I look through this section 3102, I don't see the word that it requires that I provide one form of proof is a U.S. passport. It doesn't say it has to be a current passport. I mean, I presume I would satisfy the requirement. I show you an old passport, just like the lady who came up with a school ID card from her 5th grade school. And so it seems that we've missed that qualifier in here that, it's got to be current. Now, of course, how do you define? Passport is current if it hasn't expired. A driver's license is current if it hasn't expired. So maybe a non-expired, maybe we put in there the qualifier, a non-expired, unexpired document.
See, that's
Okay,
what I'm trying to prevent, because maybe I am getting sensitive as I'm getting older, but I'm getting to the point where pretty soon they won't give me a driver's license. So, because my vision's bad or because whatever. And if I don't have a current ID or I'm no longer traveling and I don't have a current passport, then you precluded me from voting. I think we should be as expansive and as understanding as taking a 5th grade ID. If someone can say this is really Tan Maria when she was in 5th grade, and somebody can vouch for it as an ID. But if you're going to start saying it has to be a current ID, I would have to stand in opposition to that, because that is the major problem that we're having in the country. That people are getting old, don't have cars, don't travel, and so consequently don't have the 2 major pieces of ID that everybody else seems to have, a driver's license or a passport. And I wouldn't want us to start precluding people from voting because they're too old to drive or don't drive because they don't have money to travel.
Thank you, Vice Speaker. Senator Ada, was that an amendment you were making? Just a comment.
It was just a concern I was raising.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Senator Yamashita and then Senator Guthertz.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I echo the concerns raised by our Vice Speaker. I think that once a person has actually been issued a U.S. passport means that that person is a U.S. citizen. But then when I review all of these other items, if you are issued a driver's license, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're a U.S. citizen. So perhaps we shouldn't be using, unless on the driver's license, does it have a category that says U.S. citizenship? So that document may not be indeed something that we can say. But anything else that might expire, but that was issued, that says that we are a U.S. citizen, I think it doesn't matter if I got it when I was 8 years old or if I got it when I was 32. And a school ID, if it does say you're a U.S. citizen, then it should suffice. But I don't think that it does. I think it's a school ID, I believe, says your name, the name of your school, and perhaps the year you're going to graduate. It used to have a social security number, but we don't do that anymore. So I don't know, I'm not actually ready to make an amendment, but what I am suggesting is that I agree that it has to be expansive. I think it does have to be rooted in, if it was a document that once upon a time said you're a U.S. citizen, then I think that suffices. But I do think that some of these items don't declare citizenship.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Guthrie, to recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It just occurred to me, what if someone presents an ID that says it's a Northern Marianas driver's license or ID card? How would that be handled?
It would not be accepted.
I just want to make sure everybody understands, when you look at that section 3, it says a combination of documents. So for instance, if it's a driver's license, you also have to present some document that shows you're a citizen. Otherwise, the driver's license by itself is not sufficient. So like it talks about having to have a certificate of birth, a Native American tribal document, a U.S. citizen ID card, whatever that is. I'm just saying, so when the section you're talking about, the school record, what it's looking for is if you have a photo ID, but the photo ID in and of itself doesn't prove you're a citizen, you need to present something else that shows you are a citizen.
Which would be a birth certificate or a passport, correct?
That's why for a passport, all you need is a passport.
All right.
You don't need anything else
Now,
with a
has the
passport.
commission been asking for those documents when people come to register? A passport or a birth certificate?
Yes.
Okay. And how do you handle folks that come from the other islands to register to vote? You ask for their passport and their birth certificate
I'm sorry?
to show citizenship? To show citizenship.
It's the U.S. passport. It's a combination of, either it's it's either the passport or the first set, or a combination in II.
Okay. And how about residency? How do you affirm someone's residency on Guam, that they meet the eligibility requirements as a resident of Guam?
They swear to it on the affidavit of registration.
Is there any auditing of that? Attestation? I mean, you just accept it? You don't question it or anything?
No, Senator, unless someone else comes up before us and challenges it.
The only reason I bring this up is I recall there were some reports in the media that during the last election there were folks that came in from the Commonwealth to vote. And there were questions about their eligibility. So I just bring that up because that, although I really support Senator Cruz's concerns, I support them 100%. I just want to make sure that there are safeguards here so that we're making sure we don't have flying voters. They call them flying voters. You know, they fly from one place to another place to vote. Thank you very much.
Can I?
Thank you, Senator Guthrie.
In response to Senator Guthrie, the case you reference is with the Attorney General's office for review now. Okay. Just on a comment on the Vice Speaker's concern, I think the reason why I think a lot of the states have enacted a lot more restrictive requirements is because of a lot of things that are happening on the border. There are some states that have relaxed their registration requirements, in fact, allowing registration on Election Day. So there is a big debate in the states. I think, based upon my experience, we have not had, I think, any cases, as far as I know, where somebody came in purposely, deliberately to register to vote under false pretense. Now, if in fact somebody has done that, they can be challenged on election day when they go to vote. I think personally, my personal opinion is I think what we have here is rather restrictive. I think we should open it up. I think we have the safeguards in there, but this was done back in the 25th Guam Legislature. It was widely debated. There are a number of reasons why it was done, but in my opinion, I think it's too restrictive.
Thank you. Senator Tony Ada, you recognize?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Probably what we can do is to, they have the Real ID Act of 2005. And if I may, Mr. Chair, I'll just read from Department of Homeland Security. And what it is that in January 2008, the Department of Homeland Security has issued a final rule to establish minimum standards for state-issued driver's license and identification cards in accordance with the Real ID Act of 2005. And these regulations set standards for states to meet the requirements of the Real ID Act. And including in this, these requirements is information and security features that must be incorporated into each card, the proof of identity and the lawful status of an applicant, and verification of the source of documents provided by the applicant. So with the Real ID, and maybe if we incorporate the Real ID into place F under Coast Guard Merchant Mariner card, the Real ID, that should, just the Real ID already has the features that are embedded into it that establishes the individual's proof of identity and status, legal status within the U.S.
So is that an amendment, Senator Ada? Senator, is that an amendment? You
Yes,
can repeat that amendment?
I'd like to place that as an amendment and make it II and then F, where we can incorporate the Real ID.
Okay, on the amendment, Senator Yamashita?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I wonder if Senator Ada will yield to a question on his amendment, and that is, understanding after Attorney Cook helped me understand what I and II mean. The proffered amendment, would that be more appropriate to make that actually number 3? Because I'm not sure, I'm wondering if Senator Ada can tell us.
Senator, will you yield to the question?
Does it make more sense to become either number 1 or number 3 versus a part of a combination requirement?
Senator
Yes,
Ada?
we can do that. I'm amendable to that. We can put it under, instead of II, E, we can put it up into number 3.
Okay. On the amendment to the amendment, Vice Speaker Cruz?
If the sponsor would yield.
Okay, so what's your question?
I'm just trying to figure out how soon will it be before Guam gets this new ID. I think that's part of the problem that we're having up at Rev and Tax. And will it be in my lifetime?
Foresight.
Senator Ada?
Vice Speaker, we're hoping that it will be in our lifetime, but at least this would be at least another avenue that they would be able to present this ID once it's implemented.
It is going on 1, 2, 3. I think. Okay, Senator Blas?
I guess, Mr. Chair, in support of Senator Ada's amendment here and to answer, allay some of the concerns by, the good senator from the top of the hill in Petey. The Real ID Act actually is, and the provisions within the Real ID Act, and granted that we may not be there yet with regards to the Real, I think it's just the provisions and those documents necessary for the Real ID Act. I think you got, in some cases, you have TWIC cards, you have other forms of ID. where individuals have already had to provide proof of not only citizenship, but residency and proof of age and whatnot in order to be able to obtain some of these cards. Again, it's just to make, it's to broaden those identifiers, but at the same time make sure that these identification cards or these forms of identification, if you will, have some measures to be able to substantiate that this person is in fact the person that they say they are.
Thank you, Senator Blas. Senator Respicio?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, maybe we do that amendment if and when we do get that real ID here on Guam. Because what if, in the event we never have that, then for some reason the Guam Election Commission Board misinterprets it that you have to have this as one of the required IDs in order to register to vote. You never know. Given what happened in the past election, we've seen a lot of things that happened that shouldn't have been the case. And so my fear is that maybe we should suspend making that a requirement of law if we don't even have that real ID here on Guam.
Okay, thank you. So is that a objection?
Well, I don't know.
We don't have
Okay, that's right.
What if they now say you can't register people to vote because they don't have a real ID, and that is in line with...
Yeah.
Yeah, if they don't have a passport and they
Okay,
don't
Mr. Chair,
have
can we
real
just have a
ID.
30-second recess?
Okay, 30-second recess.
say that.
Committee of the Whole is back on. Committee of the Whole is back in order. Senator Tony Ada.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. After consulting with the different individuals in the legal counsel, we're going to go ahead and keep it under IIF, and it'll be an identification card that is compliant with the provisions of the Real ID Act of 2005.
If you can please repeat that.
IIF,
Okay.
an identification card that is compliant with the provisions of the Real ID Act of 2005.
Okay. On the amendment, Senator Respicia, you
Yeah,
recognize?
that's acceptable, Mr. Chairman. So it's not the Real ID itself, but it's the standard that the Real ID Act creates. So I have no objections.
Okay. Thank you. On the amendment? Any objections? No objections. Motion carries. We're still on 3102. Recognize Senator Mana Silva
Thank you,
Tyron.
Mr. Chair. I just have a question, and I'm going to ask the body if this is something that we should consider. Just assuming that these provisions are in place to safeguard the election from any concerns over fraud, the school ID cards with a photograph for me is a concern, because my children have school identification cards, and what they are is simply a piece of paper with their picture on it, the name of the school, and it's laminated. So I'm wondering if we should just, not to preclude anyone from participating in the election, but perhaps we should just limit the identification cards to those IDs which are certified by the government or issued by the government, or which meet the Real ID Act of 2005.
I think that's.
We'll have the recognize the legal counsel for the commission.
That's directly against.
Once again, going back to the way this is set up, the school ID card, it would appear the only purpose for it is so you have a picture of the person with their name. You still have to have another document that shows
Could you say
who
that
they
into
are.
the microphone?
I'm sorry. The way this is set up, the school ID card with a photograph, the primary purpose there is the photograph. So you have the name and a photograph of the person.
I understand that, but let's say I go in and I have Senator Yamashita's birth certificate. I could easily, in the age of technology, I could doctor a school ID and put my name or put my picture with Senator Yamashita's name on it and present that to the Election Commission.
Unfortunately, in technology, you could probably even do that with a passport.
And this section refers specifically for registration. When you come in to register at the commission's office or with any one of the authorized people around the island who are, authorized to register people, they have to show one or both, but that's really all it is. You don't bring your student ID on the day of election, because you already would have passed the initial stage of registering and you've become eligible. It was determined that you were eligible to register, and your name should be on the roster, and they might ask you for an ID then also to make sure that it's the same name is what it is, but not necessarily a picture, because we don't have pictures of voters. But this is merely for registration purposes.
Okay. Thank you. Any other amendments or questions on 3102? No. There being none, 3103, political party. 3104, Senator Respicia, you recognize?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, in 3104, it sets out that 10 days prior to any election, they cannot register any more individuals to vote. And also in this section, there's some words here that were striked out relative to the publicized for the commission on the self-determination and I understand why that's stricken out because that issue is maybe moved at that time. But have you given any thought to same-day registration? My question is for the Election Commission board members. And given the goal of this exercise is to ensure that as many people participate in our democratic elections, and given today's technology, I'm wondering if there's been any discussion or any move toward having a same-day registration so that someone can show up the day of the election, can register, they can, and maybe that ballot be set aside until that individual can be confirmed that they are a duly a person that's eligible to vote in that election, and then that ballot be counted?
Thank you, Senator Respicio. We've not had discussions, to my recollection, with regard to same-day registration. We have discussed the challenges and the issues that the Commission faces with the 10-day constraint with regard to registering. There's a lot of, what's required is 10 days prior to the election, you can come in and register. The staff, the Commission has to upload information, and then we have to send it to printers. And so that becomes a challenge with regard to the time constraints. It's especially in the past election, it was a huge challenge where we had experience with individuals who registered 10 days, some even a little longer, 15 days prior to the election. They went on election day and their names weren't on the roster, so always constantly calling into Election Central to verify. So same-day registration is not...
So there's two issues here. The first issue is 10 days is not enough because you need more time to have a finalized listing. But are you suggesting then that the 10 days be increased to 20 or 30 days just for purposes of cutting it off? And then after we decide what to do then, the next question, Mr. Chairman, will be whether or not this body should allow for same-day registration.
If this body deems it appropriate and wise, then the Election Commission will do as it is mandated. We just ask that you keep in mind, if we were to do something like same-day registration, that the appropriate funding be allocated so that we can ensure that the mandates are carried out appropriately and by law. 10 days is too short. In reference to the question with regard to 10 days, it is too short to get rosters printed, get individuals, upload information. That's a lot with the amount of staff, the lack of staff that the Commission has.
But how about if we provide for 10 days after the election for the Guam Election Commission Board to certify a new batch of voters that were registered on the day of the election?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Is it possible then to provide a certain number of days after the election for the Guam Election Commission and the staff to certify if those who showed up on the day of the election to register and vote, because then you would set those ballots aside. And then so if you're saying here that the law's been 10 days prior to the election, do you think it will make sense to provide up to 10 days after the election to certify all those new voters that were registered, certify them, and then have those ballots counted? I mean, you can hand count them and add them to the totals.
So you would like for same-day registration, and then when the individual comes in to register, we verify that they are U.S. citizens and they've met all the requirements to be able to vote, residency.
Well, maybe not verify them right then and there. Maybe you could, maybe you can't.
So then we allow them to register and they vote,
Yeah.
and then
Take
upon
their ballot,
voting,
take their ballot, put it in an envelope, two envelopes.
it's kind of like the provisional voting.
Yeah.
It's provisional.
Set those aside.
And then set those in a separate box somewhere and then review them after. Okay. I will allow my colleagues to comment on that, but just off the top of my head and based on my experience, that could be a logistical nightmare.
But couldn't you just follow through on those that registered on the day of the election and just have a delayed certification?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Logistical nightmare, as the law stands, you close off your registration 10 days prior to the election, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so if I were to move and ask this body to move into doing same-day registration, couldn't then we just add 10 days after the election, and that would give you time to certify those? And then afterwards, then you would, then the Guam Election Commission Board will have a delayed certification. And you,
in my opinion, as a commission member, I think that would probably increase participation.
and isn't that the goal?
Yeah, it is a goal. And also, if there were any issues within the election, they could be dealt with prior to being certified also. So that might be on benefit to make sure that all elections are fair also, in my opinion. That might be one good thing.
And also, Mr. Chairman, you may have some instances where someone actually registered to vote by a registrar, and they didn't make their name, for some reason that name didn't get on the master listing.
Yeah, before it's counted. I think that you need to, in my opinion, you need to do a mandate that says that those ballots shall be kept in a separate ballot box. I mean, when you be careful when proposing a language so that you don't leave any loopholes for it. And we're not here to propose law. We're here to carry out what you guys do. So if you feel like that's something you guys want to do, I think it would be a good idea. But just be careful in the language that you guys propose.
Mayor?
You would wait for the chairman to recognize you, not me.
He did already. Yeah. This bill provides for that, technically, same-day registration. If you cut it off 10 days before the election, you miss the deadline. I want to vote just the same. I go to the polls that day, and I will be given a provisional ballot, which you mentioned. That's what a provisional ballot is. That was the intent of a provisional ballot, so that we do not turn anybody away. You get a provisional ballot even though your name does not appear on the roster, even though your name does not appear anywhere, but you want to vote. And on this provisional ballot envelope is an affidavit, and you fill it all out. And technically, you are registering, because that provisional ballot, when it gets, you put your ballot in it, you seal it and everything. I think it's 2 envelopes.
Yeah.
That is filed with all provisional ballots from all those people who ended up not appearing on the roster, but they want to cast their vote.
Yeah.
And it is not counted. But when it gets to the commission, eventually, not, and it is determined that, yes, this person is eligible to vote, all the information is there, then it can be counted. And this bill before you has that later on under provisional ballots. If we find that the affidavit is lacking information, the bill also gives you the opportunity, it requires the commission and gives you the opportunity to come in and provide the missing information, or to correct whatever you made a mistake on, regarding the affidavit. And in fact, if you didn't sign the affidavit, I'm sure that you may have just forgotten it, or you didn't overlook it. But technically, we should not have any of those kinds of mistakes, because the precinct workers, once you fill out your provisional ballot, you complete the affidavit, that precinct worker is supposed to look and make sure that everything is in order.
But does the affidavit say that the voter, or the individual, to the best of their knowledge?
I'm sorry.
Does the affidavit state that they believe that they have registered as a voter on time? Or does the affidavit say that they're testing that they believe that they are an eligible voter?
At that point,
because for me, I thought that the provisional ballot box was to make sure that no one gets turned away, but that the determination would then have to be made if they registered on time. So why then would you have a 10-day cutoff?
The 10-day cutoff is so that it will allow the commission to get ready for the election.
But it says the registration roll shall be closed and no further affidavits of registration shall be accepted by the commission.
That's
turning
right,
people away to register.
because they would come on election day. They can still go on election day. and fill out a provisional ballot and fill out that affidavit, and we will consider
But
that.
Senator, I believe that people are turned away at the polls if their name is not on the list, and some people who don't vote in the general election are not aware that their names are automatically taken off the list. So in the following election, they go to vote, their name is not there, they're turned away. They're not given a provision, they're not given an affidavit, they're not given a provisional, a ballot, and told that they're gonna put in a provisional ballot process. How do names get taken off the voter registration? If you missed a general election, right?
If they don't vote in 2 consecutive general elections, they're purged, and they are sent a notice based on their last mailing address.
And so if someone shows up to vote the day of a general election and their name has been purged because they didn't vote in 2 consecutive general elections, are they given a ballot? They're turned away.
They should be given a provisional ballot.
Let me ask, I appreciate what you're saying, Senator Ruth, and I follow your thinking. They should be given a ballot, and then they should go through the provisional process. But my understanding of those provisional ballots is that someone shows up and says, no, my name shouldn't have been taken off. I'm a registered voter. But how many people actually do that? Oh, my name's not on the list. They may get upset, and then they leave. But does the precinct officials actually go out of their way to say, no, here's an affidavit, you fill out your ballot, here's 2 envelopes, seal the first one, put the... Joe, can you comment, Mr. Mayor?
Which one?
On what we were just talking about.
Okay. First off, on the same-day voter registration, it used to be 30 days before, okay, that it was cut off. And then the legislature changed it to 10 days. I think you really need to think of the administrative things that have to be done, if that's going to be done on Election Day. It's possible, but I think that the commission goes to great lengths, and I think the laws are on the book that really makes it easy for people to register. Throughout the year, you have, I think even some of your offices have volunteer registers. They go out directly to register these people. Before, it used to be very, very restrictive, but now it is, I think there's more than ample opportunity for somebody to register. And I think if you really want to do it on Election Day, I think you really, really need to look at that, because it could create some problems, okay? I could see if we didn't have all these different venues to allow people to register, but I believe we do. On the provisional ballot, if a person comes to vote on Election Day, they feel that they should be registered, but they didn't, say, vote in 2 consecutive elections, their name is off. Now, if they feel strongly that they are, in fact, feel that they did qualify, they are allowed to vote provisional, okay? And then at the end, throughout the day, additional steps are taken to verify whether, in fact, they did or didn't vote. And there's a number of cases, the majority of the cases, those who vote by provisional are found not to be eligible. Okay? The bulk of them.
Not to be eligible because they missed...
They failed to vote.
They failed to vote.
Right.
But what Senator Ruth is saying, I guess, doesn't follow that there's a provision in here that provides for same-day registration. It's 2 different things, right? Because those provisional ballots are someone that says, I believe that I registered, I shouldn't be taken off the list. Then if they're found that they failed to vote in 2 consecutive general elections and they're taken off the list, you still don't count those, you then don't count those ballots as a vote cast because they've been deemed ineligible.
Well, there are some cases after some research is done that they are, in fact, there was an error in taking them off, and that's where the provisional ballot is cast. I think, technically, if they really feel strongly about that, then they are given a provisional
But how
ballot.
about if someone was never on the ballot, never registered, showed up the day of the election to register to vote, marked their ballots, put in a provisional box? How would the Guam Election Commission handle that situation?
They would do a verification, go back to the records and see if they were registered. If they were in fact not registered, then it wouldn't be cast.
See, Senator Ruth, do you follow that response now?
I think Senator Ruth is correct. It's just a matter of semantics.
No, I think it's a matter of principle, because
That too?
what I'm arguing is that people should be allowed to vote on the day of the election. And
If you're eligible, then you can vote.
If you're eligible.
Right.
But the eligibility on the day of the election is determined as to whether or not their name is on the ballot. I mean, not on the ballot, on the voter registration listing.
Okay, let's say, let's do a hypothetical thing here. Let's say that I'm just not registered at all, at any time, never. And I missed the deadline, but I want to go because I want to vote for you. I can show up at the polls and say, I want to vote. I'm sorry, your name's not here. Well, I want to vote anyway.
Okay.
They give me the provisional ballot.
Okay.
And I fill it out, and I vote for you, and I fill out the affidavit, and technically, immediately filling out that affidavit truthfully and correctly and completely registers me. So when he says semantic, that is actually what it is, because you are technically registering.
No, and then the Guam Election Commission Board would meet to address every single provisional ballot. And if I follow what Mr. Mesa is saying, that those votes will not be counted.
That's right. So we're here.
So that's why I
lies
said
the
it's
two-pronged.
That's why I said it's principle, because based on what he said, if your name was never on the voter registration listing, master listing, your vote, with whoever you voted for, would not be counted. If you voted for me in that sense, Senator, I would never receive that one vote.
If I am, the last time I read the bill was whenever the last time we discussed this, and I believe, Mr. Mesa, I believe the provisional ballot here, if they are complete and after review, I believe at some point it can be counted.
It's not so much letting someone go through the exercise of voting, so much so that their vote is actually counted. That's why we moved to suspend the electronic voting machines, because there's no guarantee that those votes went to the right candidates. That's why we have voter verified paper ballots. That's why we suspended the early voting for the 30 days up until the election. 3,600 people voted, but there's no guarantee that those votes went to the right candidates. So I just don't want to provide for an exercise where people can vote and then their vote is not actually counted, or it's miscounted.
No, they would be counted.
How would you feel if we had, instead of a provisional process, we sent all people who were not on the rolls to, let's say, a central location like UOG? We had 2 tables set up and they could register that day, and if we can prove verification, at least the ballots would be safe in a location where they're going to be counted anyway. I mean, would you be opposed to something like that? I think that would be a way to make everybody happy. I mean, I feel like that I would be in support of something like that.
I think that'll be a step in the right direction, so that you're not cutting it 10 days off.
I mean, the problem, Senator, that we're having here is that logistically they're all right. It's going to be a difficult process to have 40,000 people go through, and then we have to verify independently each person who wasn't on the rolls. So, I mean, the 10 days is probably not a bad idea, but if you want to have people come in and vote on the day of it, I would think you'd have to have a centralized location so that you can protect the sanctity of those ballots, and their intent to vote is clear and they want to vote, because anybody can show up to the polls and vote for Donald Duck if they want, but if they go to it's their right to vote. So I'm saying if they're going to exercise their right to vote and they have to go to another location to vote, you know that this person wants to vote. I mean,
how about if we get the mayor's offices, or the different mayors involved? Would they maybe candidates themselves, but they have, or some?
We want everyone to vote. That's what the election commission wants. So I mean, we probably have to ask for additional 4 or 5 positions to have one standardized table at UOG, but at least you could get everyone to register that day, and I don't think that would be a stretch for us to do if we had the extra funding.
So, Senator, is there an amendment? Do you want to?
Yeah, maybe my first amendment is to try to meet the Guam Election Commission halfway and amend the 10 to 20. So that way I don't know if the body wants to cut it off at 30 days, because I'm hearing that 10 days is just absolutely impossible, provided that we think of a way to allow for a same-day registration process. So that's the kind of discussion I'm trying to bring closure to, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so the amendment would be to change the 10 days to 20?
Is the board,
It would be advantageous to the commission.
Of course, but it wouldn't.
Because it gives us all that time to
Yeah.
catch up and do the work, because it is really enormous. But it's to the disadvantage of the public at large.
But I said that the next discussion would be how to move toward same-day registration. Yeah.
To that chapter, you will see that provisional ballots where they are found to be correct and everything and
When they
follows the law, it shall be counted. Those votes are counted.
But if they're not on the voter registration listing because they didn't vote for 2 consecutive general elections,
That affidavit that he filled out that day, that is shown on his provisional ballot envelope, serves as his registration.
See, I'm
That's
not-
why it's an affidavit. It's a
Joe,
legal
but
document.
Mr. Mesa just said that those provisional ballots in that example is not counted. Those votes are not counted towards the candidates he voted for. You know that
I'm
maybe Mr.
We're at
Chairman,
odds then.
I'm not very comfortable with that response.
We're at odds then, so.
I'm going to ask you to take a 30-second
Yeah,
recess,
thank
please.
you. Yeah.
There's a provision.
Is it in the existing statute, Marie? to council, because only 9 states have it.
We're back on. Committee of the Whole is back on. Senator Respicio, you recognize?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I withdraw my wanting to increase the number of days to give the Guam Election Commission more time, so really the 10-day cutoff should stand. In the recess, we've been able to come to some kind of agreement that this bill does not provide for same-day registration. There's a later chapter here that says in the event like if a new voter shows up to vote and they believe that they registered and met the deadline to register, they would be given an affidavit, and a ballot. That ballot will be put in a provisional ballot, and if the Guam Election Commission finds that person should have been on the listing because the voter registrar didn't submit the copy of the passport, which is why it didn't make it into so then that ballot will be counted toward, and the votes will be counted correctly. But so my point, Mr. Chairman and colleagues, is that I'm willing to explore this further, but maybe through a standalone bill, because I agree with the Guam Election Commission. This exercise is in no way to set them up to fail. And we want to have free and fair elections, and we want to make sure that these things are done right. And I certainly don't want to attribute my participation in this as a means to do otherwise. And so, but I do appreciate the discussion so that the voters are aware of what the process is and how they have to register on time.
Thank you. Any other amendments or discussions on 3102? No, there's nothing. Just keeping it.
Keeping it, and that's...
3104, I'm sorry. 3104. 3105. 3106. 3107. 3108. 3109. 3110. 3111. Senator Pangilinan, you recognize?
Can we, this is not the section where you set the rate? No, not yet, right? Okay.
3112. 3113. 3114. 3115. Senator Pangilinan, you recognize?
Just a clarification, just to ensure that section 3115, that was stricken out. Was it stricken out because it's moved to another section, right?
Yes.
Okay, I just want to verify that.
Chapter 8. Chapter 8.
Thank you. 3116. 3117. 3118. 3119. 3120. 3121. 3122. 3123. 3124. 3125. 3126. 3127. 3128. Senator Tom Atta, you recognize?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On 3128, it talks about providing sufficient copies of the index of registrations. But I presume they're talking about providing sufficient hard copies. But it doesn't say, well, I guess my question is, in what form do are these copies to be made? Hard copies only or electronic?
Senator, our practice right now, some mayors want it electronic, some mayors want hard copies.
And so you provide it in either form?
That's correct, Senator.
Okay.
Senator Pangilinan?
The registration roll then, is there any reason why it's not, you couldn't access the database and check if you're registered on the website?
Senator, Speaker, we are looking into that. Right now, our webmaster is verifying how much information we can put on it. We have names and date of births that we're looking into. We're working with the, our webmaster has gone through states' websites and he's seen them, so we're looking into that at this point.
Any other questions? 3129? 3130? Now we're in Chapter 4, Precincts and Precinct Boards. On Sections 4101, Designation of Polling Place. Chapter 4. 4102, 4103, 4104, 410, I'm sorry, Senator Tony Ada, you recognize?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just looking at Section 4104, and I noticed the increase from 350, from 170 to 350. What kind of impact would that have on the budget?
To quote one of my bosses, a good impact. $101,000, sir. You know, I saw the fiscal report, fiscal notes, and that's what BBMR wrote. But I think during the public hearing, Speaker Ben and I were looking at it, and we came up with, I think, a very different figure.
So how were we going to come up with the...
It's 59 precincts. I'm sorry, 58 precincts times 5 times 350. It's 350 minus 170.
So, but this will double for election day. This would double the budget that you would need, right? For
That's correct, sir.
And where are we going to get how are we going to make up the difference for the short? Or are you short?
Yeah.
Do you have the funds?
Sir, we've been actually working on a real stringent budget, and we are anticipating coming forth. There are other new mandates, including registrars at the precincts, that will increase the costs for the precinct, for the election. Yes. There's a new law was mandated after May 2011 that says that we have to have registrars at every precinct for the decolonization registry.
So will you be asking for an increase in your budget come this budget hearing?
Actually, before that.
Before that, okay.
Depending, sir, with all due respect, depending on what we come up with, what you decide as a body with Title III.
Thank you.
Okay.
This is the compensation coming up that we...
Okay, any other discussion on 4104? I think, Maria, you have a...
It'd be $49,300 increase. 50 times 5 times 170? $49,300.
Any other discussion? 4105, 4106, 4107, 4108, 4109, 4110, 4111, 4112, 4113, 4114, 4115, 4116. We're now in Chapter 5, Election Days and Dates. Section 5101. 5102, 5103. Senator Respicio, you recognize?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know that we're really updating our laws here, but on line 20, I just want to be clear that we recognize the separation of powers and the checks and balances. Here it just says that the governor or the legislature, upon recommendation of the commission, may postpone any such election therein for such time as they deem necessary, and then the sentences continue. But the reasons given could be for serious cause resulting from any natural phenomenon or act of God or a public enemy becomes reasonable and impossible to hold any election. My recommendation, Mr. Chairman, is on line 20, is to say Imagalayan Guahan with the advice and consent of the legislature. And then on line 21, the governor here should be after Imagalayan Guahan. It's just a technical amendment. But for the amendment I want to offer, so the process will provide that the commission recommends the postponement of the election, and that in order for that recommendation to be adopted, the governor, with the advice and consent of the legislature, would have to agree with the commission. Is that your reading of it, Senator Ruth? Just want to make sure.
You're talking about 5104, is that correct?
Correct. 5103. So in 51, just so we're on the same page, in 5103, if the commission recommends to the governor, then the governor, so that those two entities can cause a delay in the election. Or if the commission recommends to the legislature and the legislature agrees, then those two entities can cause a delay in the election. So what I'm suggesting is that the commission still recommends to the governor with the advice and consent of the legislature. Yeah.
But we would be determining.
And that because when it comes to elections, you're an independent body, and we want to keep an arm's length away from the work that you're supposed to be doing.
That's correct.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, I offer that as an amendment.
Okay, on the on Senator Respicio's amendment, no objections, so ordered. Any other discussion on 5103? Senator Tom Adat?
I think further down in that, it's of course it says on line 23 that the postponement shall, in no event shall such postponement exceed 30 days from the date when such election should have been held. And of course, we could be it could have been postponed because of a major super typhoon, and 30 days may just not be sufficient to recover. So I think maybe the amendment I would like to make is that on line 22, that line should read, such election therein for such time as they may deem necessary, period, and delete everything after that, so that then during the deliberation of the legislature, let them at that time determine whether 30 days would be sufficient or not.
Good, very good.
Any objections or any discussion on the amendment? Motion carries. Any other discussion on 5103? Moving on now to 5104. 5105. We're now in Chapter 6, Candidates for Office.
Oh, wait a minute, excuse me. I just need to make sure that his amendment in the previous, the postponement, does not conflict with the proclamation for special election, because you changed it to as they deem necessary, and 5104 is at least 30 days. So, but I don't know, I just need to read it all over again.
No, I think if in the course of deliberation, the legislature finds that because of the, let's say, the natural disaster that we are faced with, that maybe 60 days may be sufficient time to recover to conduct, then for the special election, or, no? I think a special election is something totally different. No, I don't think my amendment affects the proclamation for special election.
Okay.
All right,
Good.
thank you, Senator Atta. Section 6101. I'm sorry, before we go on, Commissioner Carrillo?
Senator Atta, I'm not sure if that, okay, here it says that the commission would be the one to ask the governor and the legislature to postpone the election, but it never says that the commission would be the one saying, okay, we think we're ready now, can we have the election? At this point, if you had an administration and a majority of the same party, they could feasibly withhold not having another election indefinitely. Shouldn't the commission be the one to request that we're ready to go on with the election? I mean, I'm not saying that's going to happen, but to protect ourselves as a commission, don't we want to make sure that the commission is the one that requests for us to be able to have the election again? And not I mean, feasibly it could happen that there was a Democratic majority in the legislature and a Democratic governor, and they said, yeah, I had a natural disaster, so we're just not going to have, no, we're not ready. If there's nothing to ask them to have an election, they could feasibly have, not have an election. I mean, I think that there needs to be some directive that the commission would step in and say, we're ready now, and then, instead of just deleting it and not having any time frame, because at that point the administration and the legislature could sit forever.
Well, but then in that case, then the commission could just as well be the body that forestalls an election from if we're going to depend on them to turn on.
Yes, but the commission is a bipartisan commission with Republican and Democratic members and an independent member. So my concern is that in the future it could have an impact. Let's say an administration knows they're in trouble in the election, and the legislature feels they're in trouble also, and they just postpone the election. The elections need to happen within a certain amount of time, and I think without a body to nudge them in the direction of having an election, we could set ourselves up for trouble.
I understand what you're saying. I just find it difficult to accept such cynicism.
Well, sir, I'm not going to disagree with you that I'm being cynical, but I've seen stranger things, and I want to make sure that the island and our electorate are protected and make sure that their vote is the one that counts. And if they're supposed to vote every 2 years on a new Senate and every 4 years on a new administration, then we as the Election Commission have a responsibility to make sure that those elections happen. And if we let's say there is a typhoon before, God forbid, before this next election, and we're not ready, and we say, Governor, can you, hold off on the election? And they do. And we don't have to have an election until they want to have an election. There's nothing to say that, there's no time limit there. You want to delete the time limit, and I don't feel that's fair to the electorate.
How about,
Senator Respicio, you're recognized.
thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and certainly we don't want any unintended consequences, right? And that sure wasn't the case here. But maybe after line 24, if you keep all the but in no event shall such postponement exceed 30 days from the date of such, when such election should have been held, comma, or delayed as prescribed by this section. So you keep the 30 days, and if you're coming up on the 30 days and our island, God forbid, is not in a state to have an election, then the election commission can recommend, then the governor can do the same with the advice and consent of the legislature. So
Okay, we're
I'm
back,
gonna ask council
we're
if
back
that
on
follows.
5103, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
If
so
that'll
is
work.
that an amendment?
Well, maybe I've asked council if that'll work. So you're capping it at 30 days, but if for some reason you want to provide a process, as Senator Ada is suggesting, to have the Guam Election Commission come back and recommend to the governor and the legislature that they may need more time, or delayed as prescribed by this section.
That's
So
up
they
to
have
you.
to go-
It's up to the body. I'm sorry.
But would that language work?
I have to sit down and look at it.
Yeah. Or delayed as prescribed by this section. And then when you go back to that section, it'll give you another 30 days.
And if we need more time, then we come.
Or just put a cap, say 90 days. But that's up to them.
Senator, you want a quick recess? Okay, 30-second recess.
What is it that you say, 30 what? 30 seconds? And what does that mean?
Committee of the Whole. The Committee of the Whole is now back in order. Senator Tom Atta, recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would ask to withdraw the last amendment that I made wherein we deleted the phrase, "but in no event shall such postponement exceed 30 days from the day when such election should have been held." I will withdraw that.
Okay, on the motion to withdraw, any objections? Motion carries. Senator Vespicio.
Mr. Chairman, in line of the discussion that we just had, I'd like to offer a new sentence at the end of line 24, something to the effect where if additional time is necessary, the election may be postponed through the manner prescribed in this section. So if we're coming up against 30 days and the Guam Election Commission feels that the island is not yet prepared, then they make the same recommendation, then the governor and the legislature would have to agree. And so you're going to be able to do this every 30 days incrementally. Yeah.
Okay. On the amendment? No objections? Motion carries. I'm sorry.
The language is, if additional time is necessary, the election may be postponed through the manner prescribed in this section. So it cycles itself out every 30 days.
That's right.
Any discussions on the amendment? Senator Blas?
That's fine. Just as long as it's not a tsunami, and we could see that we won't be able to have one for another year, but to do it in increments, or the commission to determine we are now ready, that would be fine, the 30 days. And
Okay.
his amendment is fine.
Any discussion? Senator, no discussion? Motion carries. We're now on
Mr.
Senator
Chair,
Atta, yes.
that was just on the amendment, correct?
Yes.
Okay, if we can, on 5103, if I can just ask the commission members there, on the inclusion of the Magalang Guam with the Legislature in Guam, what was the reasoning behind that?
Because we don't want to be solely responsible. I believe it's just because they're the top leaders of this island, and they should be the one to declare things.
But would it be seen or appear as being a conflict of interest, being that we're candidates in that election, or do you feel comfortable with?
No, I don't think so, because you would be already the sitting legislature, and that's your prerogative to confer or decide with the governor, based on our recommendation. But no, it would not be a conflict.
So this is a
Absolutely not.
provision that you guys are comfortable with?
I am. Are you? Maybe you could go down the line, a senator.
Well, the changes when they were submitted here was worked on by the commission, and they voted to accept these. So I would say that yes, they do agree with this.
So for the most part, yes, we agree, because we all did it together.
It was just to ensure balance of power, and that was it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Atta. We're going to move on to Chapter 6, Section 6101, 6102, 6103, 61. Senator Tom Atta, you recognize?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On line 14, it requires that a person must have been domiciled in Guam for at least 5 years immediately preceding. Is that the same as 5 consecutive years? In other words, what if, let's say, in the year 2000 I was here, and then I was gone in the year 2001, and then I came back, and I've been living on Guam then since 2002, 3, 4, and 5. So that's five years immediately preceding. which is, but that's different from 5 consecutive years immediately preceding. Well, then maybe I will go ahead and make an amendment on line 14 to let it read at least 5 consecutive years immediately preceding the legislature, the sitting of the legislature.
On Senator Atta's amendment, Speaker Ben, you recognize?
I don't mind that, but I wanted to, in order to make a decision on that, I wanted to get the domiciled issue question. Is domiciled the same as a resident of Guam in the definition, and what would be the difference?
You can have more than one residence, but you can only have one domicile. So for instance, if you're a student living over in Arizona going to school, you can have a residence in Arizona and you can have a residence in Guam. You're only over there because you're going to school. But your domicile, presuming that Guam is your, quote, home where you intend to return to, that's your domicile. So normally, that's why I mentioned earlier, there is a difference definitely between residence and domicile.
And what constitutes being domiciled? For the purpose of this proposal or this law before us, what constitutes domicile? Filing of taxes, ownership of a home, what would constitute domicile?
Normally it would be evidence showing that Guam is your home that you always intend to return to.
So it doesn't...
I mean, the problem with domicile is it's kind of hard to define.
Yeah.
Unless you do sit down and say specifics, what is, but I mean, that's why I use the example of a student, or for instance, somebody in the military. They may list their home of record as Guam.
Right.
And they may have gone off and lived somewhere else for 30 years. But arguably, if they've always said, I'm going to go home.
It's the intent.
Exactly.
So so if a student who's been going to school comes back after living off island, let's say he went and got a PhD and he's been gone for, or let's say just a bachelor's degree, goes off 4 years, stays another year, comes back, can he then qualify to be a candidate? Yes?
I think that's the way this would be interpreted.
That's
yes.
the way this would be interpreted. So even if they filed taxes, if they were back in the States? Because some students file taxes after the first or second year for the purpose of getting state
for establishing
residency, but not domicility or whatever, if that's
right.
a word. But not, not as a domicile, but as a residence.
It would literally be a case-by-case review of the individual, I think. I mean, based on the current language, because there isn't anything that specifically says that. If the determination was that that person always intended to come back to Guam, and as you said, they established residencies for in-state tuition.
In-state tuition or something.
Technically, they would still probably be a domiciliary.
They would still be domiciled. Okay, I just want to kind of get the intent behind this in terms of what the reading is, and if we all agree on that, then, it kind of gives somebody who's listening here, and maybe if it gets litigated, then we go to the record if we can't do the plain reading, so. And the intent is to allow that situation to...
For instance, I believe this question came up recently, and if I'm not mistaken, the mayor, I'm sorry, for a mayor, it talks about being a resident for a consecutive period of time.
Right.
And that's kind of the difference.
Yes.
For resident, the person would actually have to be living in the village for X number of whatever the period was.
Right. But then also on the next one, on 6105, I thought there was a case that said if you're running for different offices, you may run for one. And our good mayor Barragata, but we'll discuss that when I get there.
Thank you, Senator Pangilinan. Senator Tom Adams' amendment is 6103 to add the word consecutive after 5. Any other discussion? Any objections? No objections, motion carries. 6104. 6105. Senator Pangilinan.
Thank you very much. When I read this, of course, the title says you can't, but I thought and I may be mistaken, but I thought that this was litigated in the case of the Barragata commissioner who ran as a mayor and didn't have to resign as a mayor in order to run for senator. And it's only to serve. This is only for service and not for election purposes. Because his term doesn't expire, you know what I mean? His term doesn't expire before the legislature gets sworn in, because he's on a 4-year term. He runs on his 2nd year for the legislature. His term doesn't expire until 2 years down the line, but he steps into the legislature when he's really serving his 3rd year as mayor. I think they ruled that he can run.
Yeah, and I think there was another case in Zonia where the mayor resigned.
Yeah, that's
right.
That's right.
And he didn't make it, so they reappointed him back as the mayor.
Him,
right.
No,
the name?
I
don't know the name. What was the name?
Pito.
Yeah, that was Pito, right? Ran for lieutenant governor. And then
If you say so.
Yeah.
I know we have some legal opinions on this. Let's probably have to dig it up. Because I think, yeah, you're right, in Barragata and also Jonia, right? But I think if they were yeah, but he resigned because his term would not expire. So I'm not sure if the case from Barragata was litigated. Could
it was
be.
either litigated or an opinion was issued that reversed the decision or was not consistent with the request that he resign, and they determined that he could stay in office and not resign as mayor in order to run for senator.
And I think based on that case, I believe the statute was amended to reflect what you're reading. And what we need to do is probably go back to the code to see how the source is. But it is to prohibit the same person from running for office for mayor and, let's say, the senator in a general or local in this case now in the new statute or in the proposed bill, meaning village or mayoral offices. I don't know. Do we have a source? Yeah.
My request is that this be reviewed with any record of any matter that may have been earlier decided on this prohibition against running for more than one local office based on any action that the commission has taken in the past. And I'm specifically, I know because I've talked to the mayor of Barragata and I remember that race, so that he was not required to resign.
Do you want us, our council, to do
Yes.
that, or your council?
No, your council.
Okay, thank you, Speaker Ben. So what we'll do is we'll set it aside, that section, and have them come back with the requested information.
So there you have it.
Senator Guthert, you recognize?
As you look at that, can you also review the procedure or policy with reference to individuals holding other positions who then decide to run for, let's say, the legislature, but the position that they are holding the other position they're holding will be up not at the time of the legislative election, but 2 years after that. This is a CCU. I was a member of the CCU, the original CCU, and when I decided to run for senator, I had to resign from the position, even though the position still had 2 years on it. But I was told I had to resign. And that's what the election book handbook said. Right, now. But this other matter you brought up, just now what happened in this recent, most recent situation with the mayor, created some kind of disparity, right? Did it not? And we also had a situation where a school board member did not resign.
Well, that's why I suggested that we look back and see the source of this particular section, because it was written the way it is, or was, in statute, based on one of those cases. As to which case it is, I am not aware.
Yeah. Well, the last recall I have is that we had a last election, a candidate from the school board ran for senator, did not make it, and then returned to the school board. He was never challenged or anything. He didn't resign before he ran for the school for senator. Now, but what I'm saying is that when I left the CCU to run for senator, I was required to resign first, even though the term for the position I held was not up for 2 years. So there's got to be some consistency. You have to have a consistent implementation of the policy, or you have to have the policy consistent across the board.
I think the commission, the entire commission would agree, if I may be so bold to say so. I think that we are in agreement with consistency for consistency's sake, but we are not in a position to tell you that you should or could run,
But,
even though you're on a board
so
or
the election
commission.
commission was not involved in the school board member's case at all?
Not me in particular. All of us are fairly new in the last, except for Mr. Mesa.
Isn't there a law that requires that he or she resign in order to run for another position? Isn't that the current law? I think it is the current law. What I'm trying to say is it wasn't enforced. If that's the law, it was not enforced. Yes, attorney.
Yeah, I mean, the commission would, if the commission was aware that somebody was violating what now is number 6105, the commission would say, you're not qualified, and if that person said they were, then they would take us to court.
Okay. I don't see how this got through the cracks. I don't understand that. Because the individual is still serving on the board, the school board. Even though they ran for senator, he ran for senator, didn't make it. And was never challenged before he ran for senator, that he had to give up the position according to the law, or not. So I'm just curious about how this is implemented. And I'm suggesting, I'm glad you agree, that there has to be consistency. Thank you.
And Senator, it was brought to our attention from the Minority Council, 6105B should be able to answer your concern as well. So we can take a look at that. Thank you. Any other discussion on 6105? Moving on to 6106. 6107. Senator Tom Atta, you recognize?
Thank you. On this one here, any candidate for whom a declaration of candidacy has been filed by a political party or sponsors may decline to be a candidate by making known such declination in writing. But it doesn't give a timeline as to when he needs to do that. It would seem that it would probably has to be made on, at least on that date when the, I guess there's a deadline to submit all our paperwork. Whatever you call that deadline.
60 days, Senator.
Well, there's a deadline when all candidates have to submit their petitions and all those documents.
And then those people are brought before the commission, and the commission will certify that they've met all the qualifications, and then the commission, I believe, will direct me to contact those people that have been drafted, per se, and we will ask them if they accept or not. So it's, I think the trigger is right before the lottery on the ballot.
I think there should be some time definite deadline as to when they need to submit that declination. I mean, you could call them today and they may take their sweet time, to respond back in writing.
It's a good idea. Because by then we are already perhaps drawing for ballot placement.
Well, that's what I mean. So it's got to be.
That would be fine too.
Yeah.
To
There's
put
gotta be
in.
some time certain before the drawing of the lots.
Yeah, so perhaps it could be within 24 to 48 hours of the filing of all papers or declarations of candidacy or petitions, whatever that pile of papers are called.
However, I'm
Yeah.
not fixed on any certain time as long as there's some time certain before the actual date that we draw lots.
So how many days would you like?
2 days would be fine.
Yeah, I think so.
So can we get an amendment on that, please, Senator? I think the commission is recommending 48 hours.
Fine. Maybe you could ask legal counsel to properly language that, to put in a 48-hour deadline.
It's probably just adding such declination in writing to the commission no later than blank days.
No
48
later than blank
hours.
Days from what?
48 hours from the time that the declaration of candidacy has been filed.
Okay, fine.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
Oh, you want to change that too?
No, I mean, the commission, I guess, let's say, so the party is going to nominate me, so they're going to put me up as a candidate. They're going to file all that paperwork. There's a certain deadline for all that paperwork to be filed. Then the commission goes through and you do the certification. So then the candidate is going to have to step forward within 48 hours and say, yes, I will run, or no, I won't.
So it would be any candidate who has been certified may decline to be a candidate by making known such declination in writing to the commission within 48 hours.
Of notification of certification.
Well, I'm not so sure we're required to notify. Are we required to? No, you file your papers, we certify, we publish the names, perhaps that. Do you want a letter?
Oh, no, I don't want any special requirements. I'm just thinking about, as it reads right now, there's no time certain that candidate needs to come in to say, yes, I am running or not. So he may decide to come in on the night that they're going to draw the ballot placements, and you're not going to have a slip of paper for that individual. It just muckies it up. Okay,
I just have any candidate who has been certified may decline to be a candidate by making known such declination in writing to the commission within 48 hours after certification.
Okay, that's fine.
So if and let's say the deadline for submitting all of your petitions is September or July 30. And let's say I submit my paperwork on June 1st. And then you go through the petitions and everything else, and I have the requisite number, I pay my fee and all that. Is that certification? No.
No.
Right? Certification is when the board meets and says,
And we've cleared you, we've reviewed all the clearances from the police department, from et cetera, et cetera.
right. And that happens at a meeting of the commission.
Yes.
And you only have one meeting to certify candidates before the primary.
Yes.
And, right?
Yes, we certify everybody.
And that is set by statute in terms of that date.
I believe so.
Yeah. Which is the 60 days prior to the election, right? Yeah.
So
it should,
so it
so
should
within,
be 48 hours.
Within 48 hours of the certification of the candidates, right? So that's what I just wanted to know that that certification is the action of the commission meeting saying packet is complete and so forth.
Yes.
And that must be done no later than 60 days before the general.
Now, if that person does not write his letter, we will assume that, you know, he is a certified member and is eligible to appear on the ballot. And his name will be printed in the ballot. And because he didn't want it in anyway, he doesn't need to campaign, and eventually perhaps he'll lose unless he's just too overly popular and everybody votes for him. Then he has no choice. And that would be his problem.
What, you're talking about the 60-day period, right? 60 days to file will be July 3rd. What happens, depending upon the number of people filing late, the commission can finish everything up within 2-3 days or a week. Then the director reviews all the documents, presents a memo to the board stating all these candidates have met the requirements and puts it before the board to certify. Now, if the one that is sponsored is named on there, the commission will have the director notify that individual, respond in writing within 48 hours. And there's been cases where some have declined. You know.
Okay, so on Senator Tom Atta's amendment that was read, do we have that? The clerks have that? The body understands the amendment? Any discussion? Any objections? Motion carries. We're now on 6108, 6109, 6110. Now in Chapter 7, ballots. Senator Tom Atta, you recognize. Okay. Okay, a motion?
Can we just have a 1-minute recess here?
Okay, we are on a short recess. Committee of the Committee of the Whole. The Committee of the Whole is now back in order. Senator Respicio.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I move that we recess till 2 p.m. tomorrow.
Okay. So we're recessed until 2 p.m. tomorrow.
It was